recording idea is good. And I hope you don't mind that we are going to record. First of all, here on our agenda slide, this is the 5.7 gig equipment that we built for the Cowtown Hamfest in January. And so these are a pair of 12-foot dishes. It's a symmetrical build, so everything on one side was exactly the same as the other side. And we're running the new radio here in Ubuntu on these CF33 Toshibas. And so these systems consisted of Pluto SDR into a small dual mimic amplifier to get us up out of the -1 dBm world, and then through an SMA switch, typical SMA relay, 12-volt relay, into the feed horn. And the feed horn is homebrew. I know that that feed horn is in the hands of Richard now Berger, and it's been tuned up and really tuned up quite a bit better than it was the day that you're seeing it here. And so these little guys should be able to communicate over many kilometers, but they were just for demo purposes on the venue there.
Hey, Jim, how big are the dishes again?
They're 12 inches.
There we go.
All right, so we've started the meeting, and we have a technical program I think is exciting. I really appreciate these gentlemen putting together the presentation and giving it the thought and the time it takes. There is, first of all, Wes Atchison with his Astro-Imaging talk. Then Greg, I don't know where that backward slash came from. Sorry about that. But he's got a Generation 3 transverter. Very nice. And there was somebody asking about 10 gigahertz last night on Slack. This is the classic component style design that can be achieved with not a lot of money invested. And then Logan Dunbar, N5RLD, is going to talk to us a little about Linux. He's got a couple of very interesting things that I'm interested in that he's going to present here. And then I have a brief Universal Radio Hacker demo, which does a replay that I'd just like to show. It's a time filler more than anything, but it is interesting to see the tools that are coming about. Someone was talking about AI here earlier, and there's a whole industry that has sprung up around ethical hacking, and they also use AI since somebody on the other side of the world has broken down a protocol and possibly an encryption method, and they put that on the wiki, and next thing you know, people everywhere have that data, and they're able to decrypt, especially these small IoT devices that don't go to a lot of trouble with their encryption. Then we'll have some show and tell and some other items, and I don't think, we'll go any further than that. And we will now turn it over to Wes Atchison. So, Wes, if you'll work to get your share going, take it away.
Okay, let me get the full screen here.
See the PowerPoint now.
All right, how come I can't? There we go. There we go. I got that. Finally got it up. Okay, this is kind of version 2 of a program that I presented back in 2009 that Al Ward had asked me to do. But it's been greatly updated with a lot of the stuff that I'm doing now that my equipment wouldn't do, and the improvements. But we'll start with a kind of a slight review. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about the types of telescopes, types of mounts, some basic camera a little info on the Okie-Tex Star Party, and then some processing, and then some information on local groups. So here we go. About 400 years ago, Galileo took what was believed to be a toy for terrestrial use, more or less, and pointed it at the moon and Jupiter. And, went wild from there. He eventually pointed at the sun, which didn't do his eyes any good. But then later on, Newton came along, Isaac Newton came along and come up with a telescope called the Newtonian. In 1669, he built one. Then more modern day telescopes, Cassegrain presented it in 1672, which the Cassegrain is just like a Cassegrain fed dish. In fact, it is. I'll got some schematic diagrams of each type here in a minute. In the Schmidt Cassegrain in 1930, the Maksutov, which is a Russian version, and in 1941, and also in 1910, the Ritchie Crichton version, which is that's what I'm using now myself. I really like the scope. But a little bit of basics in there we go. When Galileo looked, he only had a single lens out here and an eyepiece, and his whole telescope was about an inch in diameter at the most. University of Oklahoma has a large area dedicated to Galileo and a lot of the papers and that they have gathered in their museum up there. And I've heard several, actually it's been the same speaker at the Okie-Tex Star Party over several years speak about it, what they've gathered and what's available for research there. Later on, they began to put additional lenses out here, 2 or 3 lenses to correct for some of the aberration that's caused by a single lens, and then also aberrations in the eyepiece, which most eyepieces today are multi lenses as well, trying to get a flat view across the whole eyepiece view, so that there's no aberrations and astigmatism and things like that in the field of view. The Newtonian reflector is just that. It's a light comes in, hits the parabolic mirror, comes up, hits a flat mirror, and out to the eyepiece, and you got the same eyepieces work universally. And there's 2 basic standard eyepieces today. Well, there's actually 3. One that comes with a lot of the toy telescopes, the 0.9-inch diameter eyepiece. The lower end telescopes have a lot of 1.25-inch eyepieces, and there's a lot of great eyepieces in that size. This is the diameter of the eyepiece, and then the 2-inch eyepiece, which if you ever looked at through a telescope with 2-inch eyepieces, you would fall in love with them. Your pocketbook might not, but your eye would. By the way, if there's any questions, just break in and say, and I'll try to answer my best to answer. Okay, then the cadiotropic scopes, which is a Schmidt Cassegrain. The light comes in, hits the mirror, comes back to a flat secondary mirror, and then back out. But the key thing here is a corrector plate, which takes care of, again, the aberrations created in this with a flat mirror here. And again, the eyepieces are all the same. This is probably as a kid, you saw in the scientific magazines and a lot of magazines of the orange tube Smith Cassegrain that Celestron sold, and they were very popular and come in sizes from about 5" to 8" was the most common, but there's 11" and 14". And that 14" it takes, I know a guy that has one. He somehow figures out how to mount it himself. Those of us, when he's around, we pitch in and help him because we don't feel like it's safe for one person trying to handle that much glass and telescope. The Moxotov Cassegrain is a version coming out of Russia. Now this is a curved corrector lens, but that's basically all the same for the rest of the Cassegrain feed. Now the Ritchie-Crichton, it's again a Cassegrain, but notice the primary mirror curved, but the secondary mirror is also curved. There's no corrector plates, and this gets rid of a lot of astigmatism problems. And it does have some aberrations out in the far corners, but that can be corrected a lot by with field flattener lenses, or even in the imaging world, the camera that I'm using right now is very well suited for this type of telescope. And so it's the CCD, or excuse me, the CMOS chip is large enough that dimensions are such that there's very little correction factors on the edges where you lose it. We talk about mounts. There's two basic mounts: a German equatorial mount, or the typically just mostly called an equatorial mount, or the Azel mounts. I'll show you why, technically what the differences are and why the equatorial mount is most popular, especially for astro-imaging. Either mount works great for visual. The whole key is in there is right here, and there's where the expense is and how sturdy that is. And this is a picture of, a Walmart special or something like that. Sells. They're not very sturdy, but they're fine. Visually, you're going to have a lot of, with this tripod and everything, you'll have a lot of wobble around. So you'll get the scope on the object you want to look at, and you focus it. Then you got to wait a little bit while the vibrations all settle out. So, by the way, wooden tripods help quite a bit there because they'll absorb a vibration. A low-end cost Newtonian mount and an Azel mount normally uses the Newtonian scope mounted in the fashion you see at the right. It's called a Dobson mount. A man named Charles Dobson was building these things and setting them up on the streets of San Francisco, and it became very popular. And I have looked through one that has a 30" mirror down here. Now you're on a very tall ladder, and as Jim and I were discussing not liking ladders, I made sure there were a couple of guys holding the ladder so that I'm probably 6 or 8 feet off the ground. So it's a huge thing, and the mirror is very, very heavy, and the mirror is actually, you take it out and store it separately. This telescope is not that way. It's all fixed in, but basic construction is fairly simple. A lot of homemade ones this way, and you can combine large mirrors. The normal thing is tracking is just push to is its called. And you can push an azimuth and elevation to get the object you want to look at, and then as time goes on, you got to push it, and again to keep it in the field of view. There are devices made that are a rotating platform that is kind of like a rocker. like your rocking chair to some extent, and it will keep track. But every now and then, but then once it gets past its mechanical limits, you have to re-establish everything if you want to continue viewing the same object. Predominantly, this is a visual thing, though there have been people taking some quick snapshots through it with CCD, with the CCD cameras, and telephone, your cell phones, and so forth, and quick short shots through interesting objects. An as-L mount. This is exactly what this is. You can crank azimuth and elevation with this. These are the type of telescopes you see sitting in the background in movies in somebody's apartment, or they're sitting out on a hill somewhere. Or this type of mount. It's really more for terrestrial viewing rather than astronomical, but you can point it up. It's just harder to follow, and you got the stability of the tripods and all of that. But it's inexpensive mechanics, which, cost can drive a lot of things, just like in ham radio. This is a common, what's known as the fork mount, Celestron and Meade. I think Celestron may have been the first of this back in the 60s that came out with it, but a very popular mount, as-L mount. They tended to be a little expensive. There is a tracking motor in right section, and usually has a deck motor, so that actually this would correctly to use the termination. As long as it's in this configuration, it would be an elevation and an azimuth type motors for adjusting, and you'd have to trust, just like the mechanical mount of the Dobson that I showed earlier, was you got to move in both directions to stay on an object. But they're very good, very nice visually. This particular thing has a go-to to it, I forgot to mention, which with the keypad, you type in what object you want to look at and push the button, and it'll move there, which is really great if you have limited knowledge of the sky and don't want to have to spend a lot of time learning, but prefer to be looking. Imaging can be done. Usually it's pretty short exposures. So we'll move on now. Give you an example of what happens between, this happens to be what happens mechanically in an as-L mount. You get field rotation. If you'll notice the object, just look at this line of dots, representing stars. I guess this is supposed to be Orion. That's not the belt right there. It would be if it's Orion. But how these stars now started, here to the upper left, and now it's to the left. Now it's to the lower left, or excuse me, right. I'm sorry. But this is what happens with movement. So you have to move. And if you'll notice, here's the camera. Not a great representation of a camera, but you can see what the camera is doing with the arrow and how it's moved each time. And this causes streaking and so forth in your image. So usually will limit the time length of exposure with this, but it's not impossible to the image with it, and even some auto guiding. The problem there is you have to wait till things settle out, because you got two directions to move. On an equatorial mount, you don't, if you look at what happens with the scope, is it moves around the equatorial, the polar axis, which here's Polaris, or actually not Polaris, the celestial celestial north, which is just off of Polaris, and you can correct for it. There's telescopes that fit in the axis, the polar axis that you can use to adjust to. There are even an electronic a camera, which I have that with the software it has, screw, and a camera is mounted on the polar axis on the mount, and then you can step through the software and move the scope around a few times, and bingo, you got your polar line. It'll take 10 to 15 minutes to do that, depending on how good a day you're having. And then I know some people can do it faster than that, but anyway, I used to take 2 hours or more to get polar line with just looking through the polar scopes. But you need to be accurately polar aligned, and that's why I'm stressing that. The beauty of the equatorial mount, depending on how good your polar line, you only need to move in the right ascension axis. And when it's automatically being controlled by, normally there's a motor in there that's being pulsed along, and then when you add computer to guiding and all in there, it's computer programs. They only move it forward or stop that way, and let it catch up if it's things are behind. That way you don't suffer the backlash in all of the geared arrangements. Gears always have backlash. Even the most expensive gears have backlash. And even there is a backlash there are some direct drive scopes. There is an electronic backlash in those. So anyway, there's always some form of backlash. Hysteresis would be what the electronic backlash is the correct term for that. You only move the deck axis to correct for polar alignment and any other error in the mechanics that are not perfectly round, and things don't move perfectly aligned with each other. In the polar alignment, equatorial mount is the right ascension axis is line 2. This, and by the way, right ascension is roughly equivalent to longitude adjustment. So as things roll through the sky, but you getting all of that lined up. And here's with an as-L mount. If it when you put it this way on a flat surface, you got to correct for azimuth and altitude adjustments. But getting it on a wedge, this is the best way to use a as-L mount for imaging, especially, is putting it on a wedge, which gets the polar axis this angle is adjusted to your location, your latitude. And then this is a little better where you can see this basically has the wedge built in by this tilt, and its axis would be going towards polar north, or the celestial north, and this would be the equator, or the equatorial. It's not really the equator, it would be the celestial equator. Whoops, too many buttons. Back up. So that kind of gives you why most astronomers prefer equatorial mounts, and especially the amateur astronomer, and this particularly into imaging. You don't actually, and so anyway, there's software that today you can get to connect all of this together and do it automatically from your computer, which is what I use. And but we'll go on and show a little bit more of things. Here's give you an idea what the problem is. the human hair on the average is 75 microns thick, but typically 70 to 120. They normally use 75 microns. A pixel on my camera is this ASI 533 made by ZWO. It's a CMOS sensor. There's 3008 by 3008 pixels, and one pixel is 3.76 microns. So look how far, if you moved 75 microns, that's a lot of pixels that you move. You're going to have an oblong star or a streak in there. So just try to imagine somebody, there's lots of people on that are having problems. Will say, well, all my stuff is tight, nothing's moving, yet they're getting oblong stars, and there's about 75 to 80, maybe 90% of the time, it is what's known as differential flexure. The scope body's moving one way and the mirror is moving the other, or the scope body's moving one way and the camera is moving the other, or even your guide scope and all are moving in opposite, in different directions. And there's lots of places where slippage or differential flexure is the term commonly used. Excuse me, I'll get some water. Okay. Let's talk about field of view or an image size a little bit. I took some pictures, which you'll see one or two of when I first started, and using a Minolta 50 millimeter lens mounted onto my my Meade DSI camera. And that lens is an f2, 50 millimeters f2. And this is what and all this image size stuff is always going to be this. This is known as M51 is the object. And notice the white line here. That's how much of the sky that the camera lens was seeing when I with that the camera, the camera CCD at that time on that scope was seeing, but because you put in the focal length, the diameter of the mirror is the focal length, and then the information on the cameras into this program, and it gives you choose different objects, which is a neat little program to get an idea of what you're going to see on your image when you take one. This is with an 80 millimeter refractor. It's an f7. And notice now, this is what you'll see. Same camera, right? This is all the camera. It's still the DSI-2 camera. And that's what you'll see. Out of the piece of sky you will actually see. And this comes up to the 6-inch Newtonian that I was using. And then here's how much, what you'll see. What that actually means is this looks, this whole area then fills your image. M51 here fills your actual image very well, and will be a nice object to view if you can visualize that. In 2009, this was my imaging setup. It was a DSI-1 camera mounted. My DSI-1 camera was mounted to the an 80 millimeter refractor, which this is I started out, these rings have nylon screws, and you can adjust them all, and all that sounds great, except for nylon bends with pressure, and heat and cold cause them to shift. And guess what? You got differential flexure between the image in this scope and the image in this scope. And if you're auto guiding, which is what I was doing, they're not looking at the part of the sky that you started at, and they're slipping apart. And this is my imaging camera, my DSI-2 imaging camera I was using at the time with my old Celestron CI 700 mount. This is where I really stepped off into Astro-Imaging. And this is a polar alignment scope that you rotate the all this out of the way, and now you can see north, and you can put things in the proper place. It's a little bit of refresher on things on the light path. This is the light path of a 6-inch f5 Newtonian. The mirror is 152 millimeters in diameter. The light path is down and back and out, and that's 750 millimeters, focal length from as you make that path. And this is just a standard Newtonian, no special thing about it. That's what I imaged with for quite a while. When I went to doing color, because my cameras at that time, my Meade cameras were monochrome cameras, so you'll end up having to shoot through filter wheels, and which is what's called lights, which is basically just a little bit of IR filtering, a red filter, green filter, and blue filter. And then I mentioned the IR filtering. And this is before I modded the camera and put a electronic cooling on my DSI-2, which was a neat little project. You can see here the different filters, bandwidths. This is the IR filter. Mainly it's trying to cut off this so it doesn't get swamped. The camera doesn't get swamped. The illuminance filter, of course, is also this general range now after you put this on there. Okay, red, then you chop it off, and it because of this IR filter to keep it from getting so much. Then you got the red and green areas that you see. And that's where the wavelength numbers came from for the title of the presentation. Here's one of my first images that I took, and it was the basic image, no calibration, which meant all the noises in there, all the dust, all the hot pixels, everything that is bad. It's a single frame, and you can't do much with a single frame other than, and you can see how bad the noise is. It's really not a good image, other than it's a good example of what we get into, what a stacking does for it, and other processing steps you can do, which I think a lot of this software that we use today, I think a lot of it is the basics of it was, I think, were funded by our federal government under the no such agency description. Now here's what I took: 44 images, just like that one, and stacked them. I did add a red tint to the image. That was done on purpose, because this area up around the horse head, this is all a hydrogen gas nebula, which that normally comes out red. And you cannot see this. The human eye is not sensitive enough to see color you can see shades of black and white. That's very easy to determine by just looking at planet Jupiter and the different bands around it and the different shades. If you're just looking at through a normal telescope, or if you or even Saturn, the Cassini rings, you'll see different shades. but you can't get color out of it with the naked eye. Our eyes are just not sensitive enough for that. And this was a pretty basic setup for at the beginning of things. And this all started in 2006 when I shot the two different the images difference between the previous slide and this one. And it had been quite a bit of learning, quite a bit of relearning, as I forget things and have to relearn them. And that, when you can't get out very often that really makes a lot of relearning get stepped in. Here's one of the first truly color, let's say true, but the color images that I did. It's an LRGB stack of 50 images that were 2 minutes long. And you can see the buildup. There were 20 luminance, 10 red, 10 green, 10 blue. I had to throw some out, so that's why you see that there's, well, actually, no, that adds up to 50. One of the problems you have is not every image you take is good enough to keep for various reasons. A lot of it can be vibration, the wind, just the seeing, which is the atmospheric changes as you're looking up through it. You have a far less changes in that when you're looking straight up versus looking at the horizon. And there's a lot of changing attenuations happening. You're looking through a lot more sky, looking at something on the horizon than you are straight up. This is a Sculptor Ninja C253. It's a really nice, and this is aberrations in the lenses that I was using. This is a 200 millimeter photographic lens that I was using, that I took this with my Meade camera. And then here's M51 again. This is that Meade 2 camera that I showed you. This is what I actually got on that 6-inch scope. And this is 27 1 minute. And notice you don't have much noise in here, which is really great. The stars are not perfectly round, so I have some vibration of some kind at this point. And it could be most likely it's probably a differential flexure, but it could be the wind, which is another enemy of getting good round stars. This is NGC 891, the Edge on Galaxy. You'll see some of these in the more recent photos that I've taken with my current setup here. And again, things are in pretty good shape here, but there is still oblong stars in there. It's really, truly nothing has changed in the setup at this time. Okay, in 2008, this was my Star Party setup. You notice this is the same setup that I was shooting with in my backyard earlier in that image. I used a container box for a shield for my monitor, so wouldn't get dew buildup on it, because the heat from the laptop builds enough heat up in there that it the dew points really got to be the humidity's got to be almost raining before it's going to form moisture on things. But notice this addition. This is a 5/8 inch conduit and fittings to make a frame with 6-foot tarps, and we built an 8x8. This is from here to here is 8 foot, and then you got 8 foot out. You got an 8-foot square. But my friend John WD5IKX and I, we had joined ours at the time, so we had to sit there and watch everything. This mount and is not good enough for me to just walk away from for hours on end without having to do some correction. And I didn't trust it either. But so we really had this in an 18 by or 8 by 16 configuration. You'll see another picture of this later on. By the way, this was taken at the Okie Tech Star party. You can see one of this guy, retired Navy captain, Bill Bradley is his name, and unfortunately, his health no longer allows him to get out and spend time, which is sad. The guy is very knowledgeable and a great imaging processor. A little more of our setup. In 2008, I had my pop-up tent trailer. This is the remains of a carport awning, which is a story in itself. I won't go into that. Then John had a little utility trailer that he hauled his equipment in. And then since we had 2 beds, he slept in the trailer with me. This is his telescope setup. And this is mine here on the other end. Both of these mounts are the same, just different scopes on the 2 side. And this is the framework for the 8 by 16 box. And there's a story behind the flamingos, but that's really not pertinent to this talk. The whole group from the stargazers, as we called ourselves, this was the whole, pretty much the setup. This is Bill Bradley's. I mentioned the motorhome that you could see over the top. This was his setup. This is Robert Kahozik's, and this is Robert. See, this is I think this is a 16-inch mirror Newtonian, and you get an idea. And he has one of the rocker plates that would actually track the objects with, and you could see the remains of the carport thing that I mentioned in my trailer through the gap here. Okay, currently today, I have 2 setups that I use, narrow field as I call it, and wide field. And this picture was taken in 2021, and things have changed very little since then. I use an Astrophysics AP900, a Astrotech AT6RC. This is it here. The same 80 millimeter refractor here, but notice I don't use the flimsy rings anymore. This is a clamshell type device that Fred Lucen, W5CWO, built for me. And then the same dovetail mounting plates. And I still use this as a little bit. It's just a visual pointing aid for the stars. Today, I'm using a ZWO ASI 533 camera for the main imaging camera, and a ZWO AST 120 for the guide scope camera. This is a mirror switch. It flips a mirror back and forth manually with this knob. And I've got an eyepiece here so that I can use for alignment. I'm slowly getting away from even using that. And this I pretty well quit installing it. Here's a little camera that I use that's on the polar axis. I use this for, it's called a Pole Master, the software and all, and it makes the imaging polar alignment really go nice and well. This AP900, I purchased it used in 2020. In March of 2020, and I was on my way to Tucson to pick it up when the COVID shutdown occurred. We went on out to Tucson picked up the mount. And the mount consisted of the counterweights, this all here and all the way up to here. All of that's the mount. The pedestal and everything, this guy had a permanent pedestal, so it couldn't be moved. And so this I had to pick up elsewhere. The mount was originally built in 2005, shipped to Columbus, Ohio, to the guy. He had the shipping boxes, and the boxes had the packing slips still on them. And only sometime between 2005 and 2020, he had moved to Tucson and had it all set up in an outdoor observatory. So it's an old mount, but these astrophysics mounts, they're they're more or less a once in a lifetime buy. They're built so well. It's all American built. The family that does this, the guy that started the company, he's still around, and he still tests and inspects the telescopes and the mounts that his company puts out. His wife's involved, a couple other family members and other employees that there. So it's really a built in the USA thing, but it's a heck of a mount. Okay, my narrow field. Okay, just a second. Did I? Oh, this is the field of view as set up with this camera and this scope. That is, and I chose to use the horse head again, but that little square is what I'm actually looking at with the scope. So I can go way further on out, but that's the actual field of view that that's on the camera lens or on the camera chip. Here I changed over to the wide field. Notice the mount's all the same. I still got the skybox, as it's called. I use a 72 millimeter refractor called an Astrotech 72 ED. And I use the same imaging camera, the SI 533 with it. And I use a little Zavani guide scope. It's got the rings and all, and the same guide camera. The problem is the field of view here is so large that I can suffer the little bit of differential flexure, and you're not be observed. Wide field covers a lot of eras, and it's so light. Notice I've got the counterweight is all the way to the top. I need a lighter counterweight than that, and then that's like a 10-pound counterweight.
Hey Wes, what's the total mount weigh?
The mount is a little over 40 pounds, but it comes in two pieces. See these knobs right here? There's two on the other side. You loosen those, and all of this, all this white here comes apart and stored in one box. And then that's called, it's the right ascension, or not the right ascension, the deck part of the mount. And the right ascension part of the mount is, again, the remaining white from roughly this black band here. And it's pretty close to half and half, which makes handling of them real easily. You just don't want to pick it up by one at a time by itself. But I have I'm trying to remember I got storage containers that resist water intrusion and all that I keep them in. And all this stuff is removed and packaged separately. I tend to like the box. It's more boxes, but I tend to like the box in packages that I can handle weight wise and size wise. I don't pack like
it looks like a hell of a mount, man. That's amazing.
Well, they make even bigger ones, and but anyway, this one's, like I say, is kind of ancient since it's been around since 2005. They keep track of their serial numbers, so they know, the history of it. I have the electronics on the mount, which I don't have a picture of, I don't think, shows, let's see, maybe, well, you can't really see it because it's this. It's all you can see. It's called a CP4. It's the fourth generation. Now there is another generation out, and the controller is Wi-Fi capable, Ethernet capable, USB capable, and serial capable connections for interface to your computers. So it's a very versatile mount. It's just I don't plan on upgrading on the controller. For what I'm doing, I really don't need it. So okay, I went through the wide field, did not know. And here's what the wide field gets. This square is what that wide field setup is actually seeing, and how much of the sky it sees. So you can see it. That's why I call it a wide field view. You can see a lot. It's the same telescope, same camera. It's just no, different telescope. I mean, pardon me, the telescope's the only difference, and but the camera is all the same. So that's why the different field of view. And there's lots of things that are yet too big to even fit in this field of view, like looking at Andromeda. There's still, you can't capture all of Andromeda with this setup. It's Andromeda is so big. But if you're really trying to look at the Horsehead, well, you want to go back to the to this. Well, this is actually too much for the Horsehead, but there's other images which you will see. So most of the images I have are with the narrow field, because I really like to dig out the nebula especially, and then also galaxies are my favorite thing to image. To me, a cluster of stars is just that, a cluster of stars. It's a bunch of stars that to me has no meaning. Give you an example. This is an edge-on galaxy, sometimes called the this one's the silver sliver. It's very narrow. And we're looking at it right on the edge. This is at 120 minutes, which it's 34 frames at 5 minutes apiece. With this, and the length of exposure is going to depend on the object I'm imaging and the other things around it. I'll shoot as long as I can without running into saturation. And when you start doing that, getting stars and all in the saturation, you're really harming your ability to get good pictures. This star and that star are pushing the saturation limits of the camera. And again, this is that same setup of what that you saw for the narrow field imaging. Let's see, what year did I take that? That was 24. That was this past September, October. This is NGC 7380. It's known as the Wizard Nebula, and if you take a look, you can see his pointy nose and all of him kind of laid back there. I really like this object, and that's 520 minutes, 260 frames at 2 minutes each. Because look at, even here, I'm pushing saturation on these big stars. But I was trying to get as much as I did to pull out all of this data that you see in here as you start to processing. I was going to say something else. By the way, what the autoguider is, I'm typically run about 2 to 3 second, whatever fits the sky well, quick snapshots that it's looking at, the software will choose a guide star, or you can choose it manually, and it sees how far that star is moved. And if you do it real fast, then you get to chasing the seeing as the seeing goes in and out. And so you try to gauge how long the image against the seeing for your guiding to give you small change, not a lot of changes, and to keep that to a minimum, so that helps keep your stars real sharp. There's other little techniques and stuff that are going on when you're doing all this. That, quite a bit of detail that you need to pay attention to. This was an image I took in 2022. It's really a great image. And again, I'm on the edge of saturation with this device, this object here. But see, it's only 60 frames at 4 minutes. And if you'll notice, my camera is cool. There's a Peltier, or actually two Peltier devices that are staged in there, one on top of the other. That's minus 5 degrees C below the ambient temperature. That's not an absolute 5C. So you're out on a summer night when it's 100 degrees outside. You can barely make 5C. So a lot of times you're even doing the camera's cooling is only capable by spec 40 degrees C, and 35 is about as good as I've seen, or maybe somewhere between 25 and 30 degree delta is what I've been able to get it. The bad part is you're now draining more current out of your battery. Typically, we don't have AC power always where we image. At the Okie-Tech Star Party, we do have AC power for telescopes and stuff, which I use. But I battery back it up because somebody is always stripping the breaker. It's usually not overcurrent. It is all these circuit breakers, all the outlets. It's usually not the circuit breaker. All the outlets around the Star Party area have fault detectors for your ground fault detectors, outlets in them. And if the leakage current between ground and neutral is greater than something like, I think it's 25,000 microamps, then it'll trip. And virtually everything, or if you see a big imbalance on things. So it's amazing how everybody, you get about 15 or 20, maybe 30 different setups plug into it. And a lot of times you'll overdo the, not the breaker current, the total power current, but the ground fault current, and trip off. And nothing worse than having it trip off in the middle of the night. You're taking a long image. So my laptop has a backup battery, but I also have a lithium 40 amp hour lithium battery pack that to back up the camera and run all of that if the power goes off, and I can be imaging while we're troubleshooting the power. The Iris Nebula shot back in 22. This shot over 2 different nights, and 60 frames of this. And the reason this is done over 2 nights but such short frame, I was waiting to the object that I wanted to image to come into get high enough off the horizon to image. So this was a fallback that, hey, I might as well get some imaging done while I'm waiting. And I think that's a very nice fallback. So I really like the way that image came out. This one I'm fairly proud of, though I need more data. The veil, as it's called, is there's an eastern veil and a western veil. If I had my wide field, I could catch just barely get both eastern and western veils in the field of view. It's so large, but I focused in on the eastern veil, and my nemesis for how long I can shoot a frame is that big yellow star right there. But when it starts to saturate, then you lose a lot of detail that floods out around the area. Again, it was 2 nights, 375 total minutes, which is 300 frames at 2 minutes each. By the way, this is all done with the software, the computer running once you choose the parameters that you want to run at. So, and usually once you get it going, you'll get comfortable with it. Then it's time to kick back and enjoy the company of other fellow astronomers and just keep an eye on it from time to time. Walk around and see what everybody else is doing and all that. So it's really a big, almost like a family gathering up there at the Star Party. Okay, I goofed here. No, yes, I did. This is actually the same. I should, but image. Why did I put it in there twice? This is also known as the witch. Boy, I goofed there. But anyway, this is known as the witch's broom, which you can see this kind of flares out, and this is kind of like a crooked broom handle and flares on out. I'm not sure how good that image is coming through. If you're observing, man, it's raining pretty good now here. If you're in a darker room, this will really pop out at you more than I'm sitting in a fairly well lit area here.
Wes, we could see red or gas up in the top left.
Yeah,
image also.
that's part of the other half of the veil. So, okay, let's talk a little bit about cameras. Of course, the original was film, and I tried my hand at film, and that is, I would consider what is called lucky imaging to get a good image. It's slow to see response because you always had you took the image and then you had to process it. I know one guy that took his Volkswagen van, and he still has that van, by the way, and drives it to the Star Party. But he converted it into a dark room. He redid all the inside. He's a master woodworker, and but anyway, he made a dark room out of it in it, and he would process his what he shot during the day, and then come back and make changes the way he shot things for the next night. Of course, he didn't get a whole lot of sleep because back then you had to guiding was done manually. You looked at the eyepiece on the guide scope and you manually adjusted things. I don't have that kind of patience. And there's little processing latitude that you have and no stacking of images. So it tends to be on the noisy side. And to get good data, the exposures had to be long, which meant more things could go wrong. And back then, airplanes flying through, meteors, satellites coming through could destroy a good image for you. Then along came the CCD cameras, which were a great step forward. And it really started the movement for a lot of people over to the dark side as the imaging astronomers are kind of known to have stepped into it. But you get the big thing is instant results. It is really nice to see what you're getting. you can see each frame. Yeah, you can't quickly process it and everything, but after a while, you get to learn what's really good and what's so and so forth. The exposures are much shorter. You can stack the images. They're less noisy. There's a lot of processing, which I didn't add in here. There's a lot of processing you can do electronically to improve the images. Now with the CMOS cameras that are the predominant camera today, the noise they make is lower, and we'll talk a little bit about the noise stuff here recently and further down the line. And so you get instant results, of course. The exposures are even shorter because the cameras are much faster. The internal noise is lower. Of course, you got the stacking the image. So lots of, and they consume less power too, which also means less noise. Give an idea here. This is, there's a couple of things I don't like about this chart, but I decided to use it. These are two different, this is a CCD chip, and this is a CMOS chip. The read noise, which really equates to, excuse me, noise figure in the radio terminology. And then in the CMOS cameras, it's almost non-existent. And the dark currents, which unfortunately this doesn't compare real easily, but the dark currents is the currents going on inside of the chip itself that have nothing to do with the image. Well, it has something to do with the image because it puts noise on the image, but it has nothing to do with the actual data from the object you're imaging, other than make it worse. For those of you out there, you heard me talk about the noise figure. Well, look right here. You'll recognize this right underneath the square root sign. There's the noise figure equation for radio that we use and talk about all the time. The QE is a quality efficiency. It's a measurement of conversion of photon to voltage per pixel. And so that gives you an idea in general what the chip is going to do. Got, read noise is, there are other noises, about 3 other noises in there, but they're down so far that they're really not pertinent, which, similar things that happen in when you're figuring the noise figure of your station, your overall system. Some of it, when you get down to the IF inside your radio, it's down to where there's so little compared. It doesn't affect you too much unless you're really trying to, squeeze it. But what we don't usually pay much attention to that is hams. There's the gain factor, noise factor of the chip, and this is the shot noise, which is just like shot noise from a transistor. The world doesn't change. There's transistors in all these devices. One of the reasons that the CMOS chips are much lower noise, in a CCD device, you either read out the whole row or the whole column serially, and then you move to the next one. In the CMOS device, every pixel you can read out individually without disturbing into the other pixels, and this creates a lower noise situation. Because don't ask me how all of that works. I don't know. It's deeper in the use of the silicon than I know. You heard me talk about the Okie-Tex Star Party this last year. The there's a lot of guys that fly drones around this place. Sometimes that's rather irritating. Especially they had, you seen where the drone crashes into people or stuff, and that has happened a couple of times up there. But here's the whole they this whole area, which I don't know what kind of shape you call it. They have run a brush hogger over, and just before we get up there, these roads are laid out by chalk lines, and some of them have been in place so long that you can kind of see where they are. If it hadn't rained a whole lot up there, you can still kind of see where they were from last year. So my trailer is right there. I'll show you another picture. What you're seeing here is a rock encroachment, part of the canyon wall that we're up in. This is all open this is to the north, and it's all open from here and flares out. There's another canyon wall. Whoops. You can see parts of the other canyon wall over here and back down here. Some really nice hiking around there. I'm not into that anymore. This is the camp headquarters. This is called Camp Billy Joe. It's a church encampment. This has the kitchen, meeting room, and bathrooms in it with showers. These buildings are dormitories when kids are in there. Some of the adults stay in the dormitories. I did it one night, and I don't know who was snoring, but he must have cleared the whole forest all night. Plus, and then there's some others here. A couple of these are for women only. One of them is for the cooking crew, the catering crew only, because they actually do a lot of the cooking and the meals that are sold up there. This building has been added as a joint deal between the Oklahoma City Astronomical Society paid for this building and gave it to the camp free. They had a very difficult time convincing these people that this was going to be, once everything with the contractors and all were settled and all of this, once it was the title was free and clear, that they were going to sign the title over to the camp. And there was some balking because they didn't trust somebody trying to give them something free, which today's times I can understand that. But, okay, I took that same image, and that image had enough data in it. I was able to zoom in this far. This is my trailer with the awning out. This is my setup with my mount here, which I had not gotten the windshield, the skybox walls up yet. My friend Bob, he's actually my daughter's father-in-law that goes up with me quite often, goes stargazing with me a lot. My daughter told some friends of her that Bob and I go out together like this. And the person's response was they like each other. Bob and I never had any problems with each other that I'm aware of. Fred W5CWO, that's his truck and his trailer. He had two scopes set up. Up here, this is Steve and his wife from Las Cruces, New Mexico. And Steve set up, notice the solar panels around mine there, a couple of here. This is John Love's casita and his pickup, and John's setup. And I think that's John's solar panel probably. He now lives in Graham, but he used to live here in Sanger. This trailer here is Craig Smith from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And this is his scope set up in his skybox. This truck and set up in tent, or all belong to another guy from Las Cruces, Mexico, that I can't think of his name. This trailer here belongs to a guy. His name is TJ. He lives in in Louisville area. His wife came up with him for part of the Star Party, and then he drove her to Amarillo and caught a flight back home because she had to work. This gentleman is from outside. He was new with us setting up in this area this year, and he's from a small town outside of Oklahoma City. And this guy. He's from Burke Burnett, or basically the Wichita Falls area, and his setup. And he's military and rented a nice little trailer from the military. I forget what they call their. You can rent equipment and stuff, camping gear and stuff. I did that when I was in the service. They didn't rent trailers back then, but I rented tents and other sleeping bags and other things like that. So that's kind of the general setup. There is a power grid, which this picture didn't get into detail, but basically the grid ran somewhere about somewhere kind of along through here is a orange extension cord that goes over to a power pole here. See if you can. Well, you can't really see the power poles in this picture, or the porta potties. All right, let's talk a little bit about processing. Photoshop is one of the tools available. It is not the best for Astro-Imaging, but it has a lot of tools that are good. It's kind of expensive. Currently, it's $23 a month. You can only get it on a lease type, or not a lease, but where you pay it out. You can't own a copy. I own a copy of Photoshop CS5, the CD and numbers. So I've never upgraded from that. But it has no capture software. We'll talk about that. There's another software, which is the processing people are doing with the software are outstanding. Some of the drawbacks, it's €300 currently. It has a very long learning curve, and it has no real manual, though people are starting to compile how to do things with it. It's designed for Astro-Imaging, so there isn't any function available in there that doesn't have some feature that is good for Astro-Imaging. But again, it has no capture. By that I mean is controlling the camera, taking an image and getting that image onto your computer. But that's what I mean by capture. This is what I currently am using. It's called AstroArt. I'm using AstroArt 8. There's in all of its upgrades, minor upgrades, which he does one about every quarter and it's AstroArt 8 came out over 2 years ago. He just released AstroArt 9, which I have not. But currently, if you buy a brand, or have been an owner, it's $165 US. But for the initial buy, and the current upgrade is a major upgrade from 8 to 9, and it's $90. It has a moderate learning curve, and I'm still learning lots of stuff. It'll do a lot more right now than I'm using. It does have a capture tool, which works very well. It also has an auto-guiding tool. It has scripts where you can program all the information you want to move from object to object through the night, and just get it going and go to bed if you want. There's free software, Stacks. It's free. It's pretty easy to learn. I played with it some. Again, no capture software. Deep Sky Stacker, I played with it some. It's free, easy learning, and again, no capture. What all that means is you need another tool to do the capture and the calibration and editing of the images. These free ones don't have curves, which is one of the tools you primarily use in adjusting the images to pull the data up out of the noise. Little color adjustments require several tools to complete the process. And this is not a comprehensive list by any means. There was one software which I began with. It was I purchased it at a moderate price. It's now open source and free, but it isn't kept up to date by anybody, which is kind of sad. A few little improvements and it would have been great. But okay, for local groups that can help you out, the Texas Astronomical Society, I believe they still meet over at UTD in Richardson. There's online. There's the Stardash Gazers. It's a Google Group IO called Stargazers that I am on. And in fact, everybody that I mentioned names of earlier on that. If interested, here is the images, the look at what images I've taken and posted. Usually takes me a while to get around to that. Whoops. I'd taken those out. So I'll open it up for anybody that's got any additional questions. Or did I put everybody to sleep? I actually went way longer than I intended to. Sorry, guys. Okay, I guess I hear no questions. We'll wrap it up and turn it back to you, Steve. And
Hey, Wes, thank you.
Excellent presentation, Wes.
Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
I wanted to tell you that I really appreciate that also there's a lot of stuff in there that is not obvious. I have one easy, simple little question. Has anybody talked about in your domain how the seeing varies over time? And because cameras are getting better and better to start capturing 20 or 30 hertz kind of data, 20, 30 shots per second, and then choosing which ones were the good ones?
Okay. Yes, and people are doing that. The guys that image planetary images, they call it lucky imaging.
Right.
They typically are using, in fact, my guide camera is capable of doing this of 30 or 60 frames per second, which is, film speeds. And so they're imaging that many frames a second. And then there's software to help pull out the better ones and reduce the amount of trash, I guess you'd say. I'm not into that. There are a lot of people are, especially people imaging in town. They can see the planets a whole lot easier, and so they don't have to worry about all the light pollution near as much. So yes, that goes on.
Sure. Okay. Thanks. I appreciate it, and thanks for much. That's I'm always comparing the optical to the RF, and so there's a whole bunch of other stuff that we can talk about later.
There's a subgroup from the Texas Astronomical Society. I was a member of, but because I let my membership to the society expire, I'm not a member of that subgroup. I'm trying to, it's an Astro-Imaging, but there are several people in there that are into planetary images. So that's where most of my knowledge base of planetary, or that type of imaging comes from, is listening to talks that they and looking at images that they've got, and they do beautiful work. And so,
Awesome. Thank you.
anybody else? All right, I'm going to stop sharing, Jim, so you can get on to others.
All right, Wes, thank you for the presentation. Very thorough, and obviously you are way vested into everything to do with astro-imaging. And I think that's
Honestly, compared to some of these guys,